On today's show, a devastating loss for the Houston Rockets as Fred VanVleet suffers an ACL tear 1 week ahead of media day and training camp. Are the Rockets still legitimate contenders without Fred VanVleet this season? We're going to break it down for you right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Houston sports, man. Never anything good. It's always something bad. What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member, also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. On today's show, we're going to be discussing the absolutely devastating news that the Houston Rockets starting point guard Fred VanVleet suffered an ACL injury just 1 week ahead of media day and training camp while attending the mini camp that the Rockets were hosting. A lot of teams do these unofficial mini camps ahead of regular training camp as bonding experiences and chances to meet new teammates and start building that chemistry early on. And Fred VanVleet with an ACL tear that will sideline him for probably the entire year. They're still not calling it a true season-ending injury. He's supposed to undergo surgery, more or less as we speak. And so we'll see what ultimately happens there. We're going to break down what this means for the Rockets, what this means for their title contention odds. Are they still contenders without Fred VanVleet? What we need to see from Thompson and Sheppard, and why the Rockets' options are pretty limited to be able to find an alternative guard or to improve the roster in any capacity in Fred VanVleet's absence this season. We're going to get into all of that on today's show. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the FanDuel app. Go check them out today. Head on over to FanDuel.com, download the app, all that good stuff. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. And look, this is not the time for cope. Like, it's just not. This sucks. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The one glaring weakness on this Rockets roster was their distinct lack of guard depth and of truly available ball handlers and high quality ball handlers at that. There was a lot of pressure that we've talked about being placed on Sheppard just as the backup guard and Thompson to step up as the secondary guard next to Fred VanVleet, let alone the amount of pressure that was going to be placed on Fred VanVleet himself to be able to, hold down the fort as the primary ball handler all season long. And now he's gone and likely gone for the whole year. Again, maybe there's a very slim chance at Fred VanVleet returning late in the season or being available for some type of a very late postseason run, if at all. But don't hold your breath. An ACL tear is a very serious injury. And even though they caught it, even though it's happening right here at the tail end of September, I can't imagine a timeline where Fred VanVleet suits up in a Rockets jersey this season. I really can't. And that I will not say that the Houston Rockets are not contenders without Fred VanVleet. I won't go that far. But this is a significant blow. And this very clearly knocks the Rockets down a couple pegs in the hierarchy of the Western Conference, because now it's clearly OKC in a tier of their own, the Denver Nuggets in a tier of their own, and then the Rockets are probably going to be lumped in some capacity with all the other teams jockeying for positioning in a very stacked Western Conference. And things could look really good. Things could still go really, really well. And we'll talk about how some of that could transpire. But ultimately, losing Fred like this is so painful because of the expectations that were being placed on this team, because of the hopes that were being placed on this team, and ultimately, nobody on this roster can do what Fred VanVleet currently does. Nobody provides his level of ball security and playmaking and defense, and ultimately, maybe the most important trait that Fred brings to this Rockets team is his leadership. And that was going to be a very important, and not even was, has been a very important integral part of this team's success over the past couple seasons. During the Ime Udoka era, Fred VanVleet is an extension of Ime Udoka on the floor, and losing him is so much more than just losing the actual production, the counting stats. And this is always what I've tried to impress upon Rockets fans is Fred VanVleet is so much more important to the fabric of this team and this team's identity than just what you read in the box score or what you can go look up on Basketball Reference. And yeah, he was coming off a down year shooting the ball, and part of the optimism for the season was hopefully a bounce back season for Fred VanVleet, from an actual counting stats perspective, and a production standpoint. The Rockets are very limited in what they can ultimately do to address this situation. We will tackle it in more detail later on in the show, but essentially the Rockets are stuck. They can't sign anybody right now to replace Fred VanVleet. They can't even go get a vet minimum guy. They can't realistically, they can't really even trade for a guy. Like there's very little room for the Rockets to do anything at all to offset the loss of Fred VanVleet here until about the midway point of the season, a couple months into the season. They'll be able to, if they so desire, to make a trade or offload some salary to make a signing. If they want to do any of that, they will be able to do that down the line around December 15th. But until then, the Rockets are basically built as is and are going to have to rely tremendously on Amen Thompson and his first year as a starter out of the gate and his first year being touted as a primary ball handler. Reed Sheppard coming off of a disappointing rookie season and a year where he was going to have pretty big expectations just as a backup guard, now being thrust into an even bigger role as possibly the starting point guard. We'll talk about what the lineup should look like and again, expectations for Amen and Reed here in a second, as well as Aaron Holiday. Don't forget Aaron Holiday exists. He's no Fred VanVleet. He's not the table setter. He's not the playmaker that Fred VanVleet is, but he's a serviceable vet. He's a knockdown three-point shooter, and he's at least a serviceable defender in Fred's absence. So not all is lost. I'm not ready to throw in the towel and call it quits on the Rockets season. That's too much of an overreaction, and we'll get into some of the reasons for why this Rockets team can still be okay without Fred VanVleet and can still be good, not okay, but like that they still have opportunities to thrive without Fred VanVleet. Let's go so far as to call it that. And I don't even think that's cope at that point. Talked about Fred's importance, and it's certainly a huge blow to this team and to this organization. But the sky isn't falling. The world isn't ending. This Rockets team is still going to be damn good this season. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But coming up, we are going to get into the expectations for Amen Thompson and Reed Sheppard and what we can expect the lineups to potentially look like with Fred VanVleet now sidelined, as well as the actual CBA ramifications, the lack of ability to make trades, what the Rockets could potentially do or go after to offset the loss of Fred VanVleet. We'll get to all of that here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Look, most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or different investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your smartphone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. They do all of the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. Because let's be honest, spreadsheets kind of suck. Look, when I started using Monarch, it was so great to be able to organize all of my subscriptions in one place because there's no worse feeling than, you're going through your month, cool, and then you check your bank account or your credit card statement and bam, like you get charged for, 15, 25, 30, whatever dollar subscription fee. And you're like, oh my God, I don't even use this thing anymore. Why am I? Okay, I'll go cancel it like later today, tomorrow, whatever. And then you put it away and you forget about it, right? And then next month, the same thing happens, right? You get dinged again and you're losing money that you for a service or a product or whatever that you're not even using anymore. Stop letting that happen. Let Monarch help you organize your finances. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, as you can tell, I am not in my usual setup. And if you're listening, I probably sound a little bit different too. I'm on my mobile setup. I'm staying with some family for a few days. And regrettably, I had teed up some episodes for us while I was going to be traveling and gone. And unfortunately, this whole Fred VanVleet thing happened, and so now we're doing this, essentially an emergency podcast here to react to it. I'm still gonna air the other the other 3 episodes that we had teed up ahead of this. There's still a lot of good stuff in there, even aside from the Fred VanVleet injury. So, uh, do me a favor, still check out those shows. We went through a lot of work to talk about and get into them. So it just kind of sucks when things like this happen. But we still, we got to talk about the relevant news. And we'll have plenty more conversations about the Fred situation and whatnot when I do get back to my usual setup and back to the studio and all this stuff. But appreciate you for tuning in as always, anyways, even when I'm on a mobile setup. All right. The Fred stuff, let me go to the Amen and Reed stuff first. And look, if you we're gonna get into the logistics of it because a lot of people are confused why the Rockets can't just go get a replacement. And I will say, please, for the love of God, stop suggesting Russell Westbrook. He is not the answer. Not only can the Rockets literally not get him from a financial perspective, he is literally not the answer for this team whatsoever. Stop touting a Kevin Durant, Steven Adams, Russell Westbrook reunion in Rockets red. We do not need Russell Westbrook part 2 in a Rockets jersey, and we do not need to rehash, that iteration of the OKC Thunder. So we already knew it was going to be a big year for Thompson sliding into the starting lineup as the secondary guard next to Fred VanVleet. We already knew it was going to be a big year for Reed Sheppard becoming the de facto backup point guard behind Fred VanVleet. And suddenly, those expectations are now just an order of magnitude even greater than they already were. I don't know if it's a definitive or if it makes perfect sense to just throw Reed Sheppard truly into the deep end and throw him into the starting lineup. Maybe the Rockets elect to do that. Maybe they really like what they've seen out of Reed this summer, and maybe they feel like that's the best way to, I guess, offset Reed's inexperience by pairing him with the other starters and allowing him to essentially just play that very ancillary role within the starting lineup, be a knockdown shooter, play solid defense, let Sengun, let Amen, let KD handle a majority of the offensive reps and bring him along slowly where he'll still get plenty of opportunity to grow his game, but there won't be maybe as much pressure as if, for example, if he's playing with the second unit and there's more pressure on him to be able to create, dynamic offense and do things to set teammates up. You're still going to have opportunities to stagger Amen and Sengun and KD and your other kind of primary offensive weapons, if you will. And the beauty of this Rockets team is as dependent as they were going to be on Fred VanVleet, they still have a lot of other alternative ways to play without having a traditional floor general in Fred VanVleet. They can lean significantly further into the Alperen Sengun offensive hub, offensive fulcrum identity, similar to what we saw out of Turkey during Eurobasket. They can allow Kevin Durant to shoulder a little bit more of the ball handling and playmaking responsibility. And ultimately, a lot of this burden is going to ultimately fall on Amen Thompson. And this is going to be the big thing is Amen Thompson entering year 3. We already knew the expectations were sky high for him as a ball handler. And here's the thing. He's been a ball handler his whole career until he got to the NBA. So if anything, this is really his chance to prove, hey, this is what I was working on all offseason. This is what I was born to do. This is what I've done my whole life. This is what I am ready to do. And I'm ready to be the de facto lead guard for this Rockets team, because that's what it's going to have to be for this Rockets team to experience success this season. Amen Thompson is going to have to be able to not just do okay, he's going to have to be able to thrive in the lead guard role for this Houston Rockets team. Amen Thompson is now your de facto starting point guard. Amen Thompson is now your de facto primary ball handler for this Rockets team. Because even if you slotted in Reed Sheppard, or even if you opted to go the more veteran route and put Aaron Holiday in the starting lineup to replace Fred VanVleet, essentially wanting to keep, similar, keep the size, keep the 3-point shooting, keep the level of like guard-oriented perimeter defense, if you will, I guess. Neither of those guys are going to be at the level that Amen Thompson is at as far as capability and ultimately just the dynamic level of play that he can achieve with the ball in his hands. And so the onus is going to be on Amen to show what he can do and to really prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he can be the future lead guard for this Houston Rockets organization. That was certainly the hope when they drafted him, number 4 overall. They drafted him because of his history and his experience as a lead guard, and they truly envisioned a player that could have the ball in his hands as a lead guy, as an engine of an offense. And we've seen flashes of that through his first 2 years. We just haven't seen it been put together consistently enough. And that's where there's that pause, that room for concern, the clunkiness of his game still, unfortunately, in the half court. We know he is a demon in transition, and even the half court can look really, really good at times. But he just is at a stage where if the polish isn't there, things are going to look really, really rough. Now, this isn't also, the silver lining here is this is an incredible opportunity again for Amen to just be given all of these chances, right? Instead of being brought along slowly, or instead of leaning so heavily on Fred VanVleet as the primary ball handler for this group, Amen is going to get countless opportunities now to prove that he can be that guy moving forward. And it's sink or swim time. And a lot of that same logic does apply now to Reed Sheppard. Whether Reed Sheppard ultimately starts in the starting lineup or whether they bring him off the bench, he is going to play an absolutely pivotal role for this Rockets team. I can't imagine him playing any less than 20 to 25 minutes a night unless he's just awful, and then they have to pivot and they just can't rely on him. But the Rockets were high on Reed Sheppard for a reason. They drafted him number 3 overall for a reason. And while he may have disappointed in his rookie year, there's a lot of reasons that we've talked about for the reasons that he disappointed, and that, it's really hard for rookies to come in and be impactful players. So he's had a whole year to learn. He's had a whole year to grow. He's had an entire offseason to work on his game, to refine his craft, and now he's got, an abundance of incredibly talented teammates to lean on to make his life easier on the floor. I think that there's a level that this Rockets team can still achieve even without Fred VanVleet that is still a championship caliber team, and that is still one of the best teams in not just the Western Conference, but in the entire NBA. Is it an uphill battle? Yes. Is it going to be as easy as it would have been having the veteran experience and the steady hand of Fred VanVleet, steering the ship? Absolutely not. But is it attainable? Is it doable? Yes. And it's going to be, this is about as trial by fiery as you can get for a third-year player in Amen Thompson and a second-year player who basically had no role on the team last year in Reed Sheppard. And ultimately, this is going to be the craziest way to see how battle tested these kids can ultimately be, and whether or not the Rockets do need to make some kind of break glass in case of emergency trade mid-season in order to not punt on the entire year. And that's what we're going to talk about coming up here in just one moment. What are the Rockets' possible trade avenues? What can they do, not right now, but down the line, to possibly improve the roster? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, $5 only. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. FanDuel is great because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds in front of you. Right now, you can head on over to FanDuel.com. Take a look at the outright betting favorites to win the Super Bowl this season. Right now, the Bills sitting atop the pack at plus 480. Right behind them, you have the Ravens at plus 550, the Eagles at plus 700, the Packers plus 750, and then in distant fifth place, the Detroit Lions at plus 1200. So for all those odds and so much more, go check them out over at FanDuel.com. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so this is the nitty-gritty. And, I apologize if you're annoyed with the episode structure that I put this part at the end and not addressing it in the beginning. I tried to organize my thoughts as best as I could on this. But here's kind of where we're at. The Rockets were already at 14 roster spots. And we've talked about this before. They had the 15th spot available, but they literally couldn't sign anybody to that 15th spot because of the way the NBA, CBA works and the cap limitations, and because of the moves that the Rockets made, because they essentially, orchestrated their sign and trade deals and the way that they traded for Kevin Durant and everything they did this offseason. Essentially, the Rockets are what you call being hard capped at the first apron. Therefore, they cannot exceed that first apron amount. And the delta, the amount of money that they have between where their current payroll is at and where the limitation is on the first apron, they do not have enough money to even go out and sign a vet minimum guy. They just can't. Right now, granted, they did sign JD Davidson to a two-way deal, and so they've got him kind of stashed away, and maybe they lean on him a little bit as well for some additional guard play. That's certainly an option. It's not one that I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about right now, but it's there. And they can certainly scour the waiver wire and try to find somebody and add them on a two-way deal and bring them in, to training camp on a two-way contract. And these are kind of Band-Aid fixes that are potentially available. But the Rockets literally cannot go sign a vet minimum free agent. So again, stop suggesting Russell Westbrook. Not only would he be a horrendous fit for this team, but he's also literally unattainable. The Rockets cannot go get Russell Westbrook. There is an option that the Rockets can access what's called the disabled player exception, which is where when you have an injury of the magnitude of the situation with Fred VanVleet, where he's likely to miss the whole year, you are afforded a DPE, which is an exception that allows you to sign a replacement player, essentially, for up to half the value of the current player's contract. So in Fred VanVleet's instance, he's making $25 million this year. The DPE would be for up to $12.5 million. However, that does not allow the Rockets to go above the first apron. I think this is a stupid wrinkle in the CBA, and it certainly should be allowed under the ramifications that, hey, the team was built to look a certain way, and the DPE should, assuming it's all hunky-dory and nobody's trying to pull a fast one, the DPE should, in theory, allow a team to actually be able to replace their injured player. And the fact that the Rockets, even though they could apply for it and have essentially up to $12.5 million to spend to go get a free agent, think about if the Rockets could get that $12.5 million, they could go sign a guy like Malik Beasley. They could go sign, an impact free agent and actually have a solid replacement level guy, not a guy that does everything that Fred VanVleet does. But if you could just replace Fred VanVleet with Malik Beasley for even just as a one-off whatever thing this year, that'd be incredible. But they literally can't do that because the exception does not allow them to go over the first apron. These aprons suck. The aprons are the worst. So they could do that. And there is an avenue where if they really felt the need to, they could apply for the DPE and they could try to open up that money, like that 12.5 million that they could spend. They could try to open that up by essentially offloading one of their current contracts without receiving any money back in order to sign whoever they wanted to sign, right? Maybe Beasley, maybe somebody else. But here's the rub. They currently cannot trade Steven Adams, Fred VanVleet, Clint Capela, Dorian Finney-Smith, Jabari Smith Jr., Josh Okogie, Jayshawn Tate, Aaron Holiday, or Jeff Green until December 15th. Because all of these guys are on brand new contracts. And so because of that, because all these guys are on brand new deals, they can't be traded. That's the rub. Is basically 2/3 of the roster is ineligible to be traded at this point. The remaining players that can be traded are, as it stands, Thompson and Reed Sheppard. So your only two remaining guards outside of Aaron Holiday. So the two guys that you're going to be leaning on heavily in the absence of Fred, those are two of the names that you could trade. And let's face it, isn't going anywhere. Alperen and Sengun could be traded. KD could be traded. Neither of those guys are going anywhere. And Tari Eason could be traded. Now, while Tari is an enticing trade piece, it would be very short-sighted of the Rockets to dangle Tari in any kind of a trade just to find a Band-Aid fix or a replacement for Fred VanVleet just for this season alone. And on top of that, Tari doesn't make nearly enough money to be able to bring in somebody that would probably truly be a replacement level impact player. You're going to it will be a net loss if you try to trade Tari, given what he's making salary. I think he's like $4 or $5 million, somewhere around there. It's not a lot because he was drafted 17th overall. Because of that, you're not going to get more value out of trading Tari and bringing in a new guard than you would just playing Tari. So they're not dealing Tari. They're not dealing Amin. Maybe if the season goes really, really poorly and Reed Sheppard looks really shaky for the first couple months, then maybe they would entertain trading Reed and opening up that DPE from Fred, but they would have to be able to trade Reed to a team that's not going to send back any additional salary, which is really hard to do in the middle of the season. And that would be kind of a really damning indictment on the Rockets front office that they just completely mortgaged the 3rd overall pick in the draft because he just couldn't live up to their expectations. I don't think that's going to happen either. So realistically, the Rockets are stuck until December 15th. They really can't make any moves of consequence until the 15th. Now, once they get to the 15th, that's where things start to get really interesting because then you do have the contracts of Clint Capela or Dorian Finney-Smith or Okogie or Tate or Holiday. You can cobble together a deal and find maybe not a starting caliber guard, but at least somebody that can plug into the rotation and be a serviceable replacement to what you lost from Fred VanVleet. And they might not even need that is the thing, right? Like we might just get to the season and whether they start Reed or they go a different honestly, I think their best bet is to just go with like a jumbo starting lineup at this point. Like I'm thinking something like Thompson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Tari Eason, Tari Eason, KD, and Sengun, maybe. Have Jabari coming off the bench. Or I mean, you could start Jabari. If you're gonna start DFS and Amin, then you can start Jabari at the 3, I guess. And I don't know. There's different directions that they could ultimately go with this, but the Rockets' best bet at this point now is to basically lean all the way into their size, right? They're going to be the biggest team in the NBA across the board now. Might as well just embrace it, right? And there'll still be, again, stretches where they rely on Reed, where they rely on Aaron Holiday. And we know for a fact, Aaron Holiday was very instrumental to the Rockets' success this past season. And Reed Sheppard, even if he isn't able to be thrown into the deep end and excel as like a starter right out of the gate, if Reed Sheppard can still just be what the Rockets hoped he would be as a backup level player this season, then they'll be in okay hands, assuming Thompson is able to take that leap that we expect out of him, and then they just divvy up the rest of the playmaking responsibilities and share the load between Sengun, who Sengun should be shouldering a lot of the playmaking responsibilities, honestly, this upcoming season, and then KD, right? They're still going to be one of the best defenses in the NBA. They lose the floor spacing that Fred provides, but you can offset that with a shooter like Dorian Finney-Smith, and again, hopefully with Sheppard being ready to play this year, and with Aaron Holiday, who's shown that he can be a sharpshooter. Like, frankly, I'm just not ready to throw in the towel. Like, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. And those are alarms going off on my phone. I don't know why. It absolutely sucks. Like, it's devastating, and there's no way to sugarcoat this loss. But at the same time, like, we also started to see something last season. Like, in that 16-game set that Fred missed last year, we started to see something really special, it felt like, out of Thompson, to where, that was something that I think inspired the confidence in the Rockets to make the KD trade in the first place and to move on from Jalen Green. And, I know there's probably a subsection of Rockets fans right now that are distraught, and they're like, should have never gotten rid of Jalen. And this is why you can't trust Fred VanVleet, and he's an over the hill point. Like, and it's just, this ACL tear, whatever we wind up hearing about how it happened, maybe I already saw people saying it was probably a non-basketball thing. Like, maybe Fred was fishing and like somehow tore his ACL. Like, I don't know. The jokes are flying on social media. First, and I should have said this earlier, but like, hopefully just a speedy recovery for Fred. Like, ACL tears are no joke. But if anybody has the drive and the desire and the work ethic to come back from an ACL injury, it's certainly a guy like Fred VanVleet, who's been, you know, uh, counted out and, counted against pretty much his entire career. So I don't know. I think that as it currently stands, Rockets can't really do much, and they're basically stuck in a holding pattern. It's going to be a wait and see for the first couple months of the season until we get to December 15th. And at that stage, they'll have about 2 months of data to be able to decide, do we need to panic and make a move, or are we confident and comfortable in this group kind of being able to maintain status quo until the postseason, or until potentially that prorated vet minimum becomes low enough that the Rockets can just go outright sign a guy to a vet minimum deal for the remainder of the season, because that's always an option as well. And again, depending on Fred VanVleet's rehabilitation process, if Fred was able to make some miraculous turnaround and be ready to play basketball again in like March or April, he could be ready for a postseason run. And he might not be, ready to be thrown right back in and take over the starting role again or anything. And maybe by then the team chemistry is to a point where you wouldn't want to rock the boat and disrupt things, but you could certainly potentially bring Fred back as an off the bench stabilizing force for a playoff run. And so, no, the Rockets championship hopes are not dead with this Fred VanVleet injury. It's certainly going to be an uphill climb. It's certainly going to be a battle. It's not going to be anywhere near as easy, and there's certainly going to be some bumps and bruises and struggles along the way. But this Rockets team is still incredibly talented. They've got 3 of the top 50 players in the NBA in Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun, and Thompson. They've got a fantastic head coach in Ime Udoka. They've got a ton of depth, and they've got a ton of different lineups that they can play to lean into the defensive identity and to really stifle opposing teams. And they still have more than enough offense to get the job done. So call me crazy, but I'm not freaking out, not just yet. Maybe maybe my tone will change after the first week of basketball and seeing how catastrophic this might ultimately look. But with that, I want your thoughts on the Fred VanVleet injury. What would you like to see the Houston Rockets do? Again, they can't really do anything right now, but what do you think the starting lineup should be? Do you think Reed should start? Do you think it should be somebody else? How would you adjust things? How would you handle things if you were Rafael Stone and Ime Udoka? Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.